Hello and welcome to the Move Your Business Forward podcast. These talks are hosted by Boll, founder of Evoke Management and CEO of International Leaders UK. He'll be talking with experts from both these companies about issues that affect SME companies today.
Hello, everybody. So welcome to this edition of the Big Squeeze podcast. Today, we are continue to talk about some of the challenges that businesses are facing. The big things on anyone's agenda is inflation, which is driving prices up and costs up, recruitment and retaining and finding best staff, and also supply chain issues as well, which are having serious issues on a number of companies right now. Today, we're going to be focusing on pricing and actually talking about different strategies towards how do we maintain a desirable price for our businesses, how to think about setting that and communicating that to our client base as to how we've come up with that price, and maybe that's the right price for what we're offering and doing. I'm joined here today by two of my colleagues at Evoke, Nigel Wood, who's one of our commercial directors, and Stephen Eshelby, who is both a commercial and finance director, who works with a number of SME companies. Both have spent a lot of time looking at pricing, and we're going to cover both types of pricing for more service-led companies and offerings, but also products as well, and talk about some of the nuances and how maybe people can think about changing how they approach their pricing strategies, which I think is important now as it ever has been with all these challenges that we've got. Nigel, I might come straight to you. Welcome, Nigel, and also welcome, Stephen. But Nigel, coming to you, pricing strategy. It's one of your favorite hobbies topics.
It's one we're spending a lot of time talking about at the moment for all sorts of reasons, as we all know. I'm going to come at it slightly differently from something you just said there about understanding the pricing that your business needs for its product, because that is a way a lot of people you could come at this. I tend to come at it from the other end and say, okay, what pricing do my clients need for the value I'm creating for the product? That's my existing clients, and that's something that should always be under review as well. Just because they're an existing client doesn't mean they're going to be a client in the future. And again, I tend to have this outward focus that then says, okay, also what do my targets need from my pricing strategy? Which is a lot more than obviously just price. It's around a whole set of commercial arrangements. I'm sure we'll come on to discuss that. And that's almost as important as the actual, if you'll call price of the product to a lot of guys these days. I'm also going to ask myself, what are my competitors doing? Okay, so I'm continuing that outward thing as the starting point of, therefore, what does my price need to be? And then the last piece that I'm going to overlay on that a little bit is some of the things you talked about at the front there, which is micro and macro economic considerations, which probably play more into the short term and will certainly be affecting everybody at the minute. And people should be looking at their pricing across the piece based on the impact of those on clients and targets at the moment. So my starting point is an external look. Hopefully I'll have done that before I got to the point of building and choosing and purchasing a product, because I'll have understood what the market will bear. Before I go into it. I guess my message there is that's a continuously moving target. And if you don't understand that, then you'll start to struggle more on both acquiring new business and retaining your existing clients. This isn't a do once and leave alone. And the more dynamic the environment that you're in, the more important it is that you keep doing that wherever you are in the business cycle.
So, well, thanks, Nigel. You raised a couple of interesting things there, and also flipping it on his head as well is a good perspective to have. You mentioned a couple of businesses you're working with at the moment. What's driving them to look at this a lot at the moment? And because I'm sure some people are thinking, how much of the time should you spend looking at this stuff? What's the big driver for them looking at this right now?
Okay, so I'm looking at there are businesses at different points in their cycle. One just really kicking off a big scaling phase. So it's got an existing client base, 5 or 6 clients that it needs to have a look at. But it's signed contracts that, if I'm honest, at times were probably underpriced to win the logo early in their life. I'm a strong believer that an underpriced deal at the start is always likely to be a problem for you on an ongoing basis. So be really careful around how you get into those. So there I'm looking at with them for two reasons. One, client retention? Are we still creating the value that that client wanted? Where are they at in their business cycle? So one of our biggest clients has moved from a big growth phase where it has become self-evident they are not going to hit their sales targets this year, 8 months in. So inevitably, they're now switching to a cost phase for the next 6 months to try and hit their margin targets. But we've still got to prep them for the growth on an ongoing basis. So we need to understand where they're at. I think we've oversold slightly into some smaller clients, and we're not creating enough value for them. So, but the logos are still a value to us. Therefore, we're going to have to make some decisions on those. But they're small contracts, and you can deal with that. Yeah. So that we're looking at it for those reasons, both from a retention perspective. I don't want those clients either to move to competitors or a different part of the market. Yeah, and remembering that at the minute, competitors in trouble might well do some, pricing, some aggressive pricing to pull things in and away from us. But we're also looking at it from the perspective of how do we sign the right deals going forward, both with the existing model, and we're looking at some different frameworks for them that will introduce different, more flexible metrics for them and their customers. Yeah, but during a growth phase, acquiring logos and the value of referenceable clients is enormous, even if they're very small. And getting the CEO to recognize he's not there for trying to make money on that client, the value in that client for him is actually just a break-even space, and for them to be referenceable and us to be seen trying to grow their business is what will win the bigger contracts going forward. And then another one I'm dealing with, which is a completely different outtake, is just going new to market. And therefore, there's a big focus on what will the market bear and what mechanisms are people using to make themselves look attractive. And they're moving into a space where there's much more flexible commercials available, and it's how are they going to play that into their model, because as with a lot of businesses, they built a fairly simple model based on I've got different grades in my product and this is what people are paying and all that sort of stuff. Now the real world doesn't play like that. The real world is a more complex playbook.
Yeah, well, that's really useful examples to share there, Nigel. Thank you for that. Just want to bring Stephen into conversation and share some of your thoughts and things you might be looking at or have looked at in this area. So thoughts on pricing strategy, Stephen, and any of your experience there?
Sure. Well, I agree with a lot of what Nigel said. I think understanding your bottom line and what sort of target margin that you want is critical for any of those conversations. My experience comes more from the sort of service sector, providing a service rather than product. But again, I think it's the same thought process needs to happen. We always used to think of it as a sort of aeroplane, and you have your first class passengers, your business passengers, your premium, your economy, and it's understanding what's really important to them and where you sit in that proposition. And then obviously you can tailor the sort of service that you're offering to them, but still in mind that you're still targeting a specific margin, and trying to think in their eyes around actually what they want, what value you're delivering to them. So just a couple of examples of, obviously if you're in that at the front of the plane, perhaps you might want more of a dedicated team. You might want some additional software, some more transparency, more data that they might want in that service, more service offerings, depending on what sort of business you are. And then perhaps further back in the plane, it might be just more of a call-off basis, less dedicated, but understanding what's really important to that. And then quite often you're in discussions with procurement, and obviously they want to be able to deliver savings to the business and where they might want to see those savings. So there's many levers that you've got to pull. You can do sort of volume rebates on the actual pricing that they've got. So there's lots of different levers that you can, but it's understanding what's really important for them, where you sit on that proposition. But still, you need to understand what you're offering so that you can still maintain a profitable offering. But equally, touching again on what you said, Nigel, sometimes you've got your big clients, sometimes you've got your smaller clients, and you might have a different sort of target margin depending on how big a business, how important that book of business is for you. Because sometimes you might accept a lower margin if you can use that to win other business, or if it gives you more experience in that space that enables you to have a wider, more diverse team to support you winning other bits of business. So it's not always the same number suits all. It's very important that you have a diverse set of business so that you can weather the storms of what we're looking at today.
I think that's really interesting, using your analogy around grading or distinguishing different client types. And I think something like the airline categories is a great, easy to understand one. And I think certain businesses never go into anywhere near that level of detail. And that's not that difficult to do, just to distinguish clients and think, actually, have we got this right? And it changes as well, because expectations change over time. And I think as you work with clients for a long period of time, the people in those businesses change as well. And you've got to adapt and understand, well, where they're at, who are your key stakeholders, and what level of service are they expecting? And is that changing, or does it need to change? Nigel, have you used those kind of methods of distinguishing clients, or anything else that's useful?
Yeah, so we would certainly for I mean, it's pretty typical in software as a service, software as a service, so in SaaS businesses where I've got exposure to a couple of those. Those are pretty key to us in terms of giving the breadth of functionality and understanding how that flex of pricing strategy against what you're delivering is important to understand. But the starting point, again, is understanding what do they really want from you. Don't try and sell them a business class ticket, and to use your analogy, if actually all they needed was the economy, or just to arrive reasonably fresh, having gone through the premium economy piece, if that was going to suit them, and that's kind of that's where they're at in their business cycle. We've got a couple of other interesting dynamics happening in the minute with some of my clients. One of them opened in the States recently. Yeah. So obviously what's happening, and this is back to the microeconomic or micro or macro, call it what you will, I guess, in relation to that one, and the play that has on them and their pricing. So what looked like the right deal for a UK-based company a little while ago could look more attractive or less attractive now. So if you are in the space where you're operating outside the UK, your commercial arrangements need to have thought about that. Don't wait until you decide that you've got your first exposure to hedging currency issues. If you're in that space, which is sort of where these guys are at. Fortunately, we set them up in the right way to do that. At the precise moment in time, obviously, we're seeing a benefit with what's happened over towards the States. The deal where valuation of the pound has created more opportunity and better margin from that direction, if that makes sense. The other one that all my the guys I'm trying to deal with and how they hedge into it is around the uncertainties of inflation and cost base going forward, both cost base, expectation of suppliers, and what's happening in that market. So when you're looking at your commercials and your structure, that should be a major focus at the precise moment in time. I would say the main thing that's I think is common to existing clients and to new people in the market, and when I'm looking at what competitors are doing in the market for my clients, is around commercial flexibility and the role they play in price. Pricing strategy is not just about price. Does that make sense? Yeah. It's about the commercial arrangements, the degree of flexibility, how you deal with peaks and troughs and demand for them, how you hedge payment terms for them, how dynamic you can be in the commercial offering you have compared to your competitors, such that you de-risk the deal for people. So it's about balancing the risk of exposure for them on the deal. Will play straight into your pricing strategy as well, and may make your value greater from a pricing perspective, i.e. you can charge a higher price if you're able to be much more flexible with your commercial change model, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thanks, Nigel. One thing I was just going to pick up then, I was just thinking from what both of you had said, pricing things to have that strategic client or that logo or that company name, I see, and this might be more for some of the projects you're involved with, Stephen, in the kind of build environment. There's a lot of these kind of vanity projects where people go, we want to win that work, so we're going to price to win it, and then we've got that as a project on our books. And there comes a point where you've just got to stop doing that. And if you look at some of the, whether it's the top architects or top designers out there, they never have to do that, right? Because people want them to come in and design their project. So at what point does a business have to just go, we've got to actually charge properly. We've got to stop going for things that, as we scaled or as we were growing, we want to have the name of that business, client, building, whatever it is. We just shouldn't be doing it now. We've got to be more commercial and make profit on every product, every offering, every service we do. Any thoughts on that, Stephen? At what point it makes sense to kind of make that transition or distinction?
I don't know whether there's a specific point in a business's evolution. I don't know whether I have a good answer for that, but I do think that you obviously need good case studies, a good track record, and the power of the brand, your brand, obviously helps that. So I think you have to be relatively established before you can start making that decision. But I've seen many people come unstuck by pricing too aggressively and really paying the price. So I don't know whether that's a good enough answer, but I just think you just have to be constantly aware of your book of business and ensure that if you do price aggressively for a specific project, you do it understanding the risks and the bottom line, and you don't start to get drawn into a conversation with procurement where they say, well, actually, Joe Bloggs is willing to do it for that. And we know people talk and they understand sort of pricing. It's amazing how transparent it actually is. So if you do it, there needs to be an exception and there needs to be a clear decision-making process to get to that point. So in any sort of pricing or RFP renewal, making sure that you have sufficient governance around that decision-making process so that if someone is selling additional contracts, they're doing it for the right reason rather than just to add it to their sales ratio.
I think that's a really good call and description of that there, Stephen. I'm going to add to it as part of that consideration of looking at the deal is what's the internal overhead in time and effort to maintain the relationship and deal if it's not going to be something that's making you a lot of money? Because not only are you then, in the nicest way, being a busy fool, it's the lost opportunity cost of your internal people, which tends to be one of your, your delivery team can be one of your tightest assets, that they can't be working on more profitable deals or indeed hunting new pipeline. So I'm a strong believer if you want to keep it and it's not great, at least make it low effort when you've got there, and make sure the deal manages that for you and the client, that the client themselves is also not going to be a high maintenance client if they're going to be a low margin client. These things kind of go hand in hand. You don't mind putting the effort in if there's a nice high margin scaling opportunity coming down the pipeline, do you?
Yeah, no, it makes sense. The other thing I thought would be quite interesting to talk about is obviously we can all sit here in our businesses, or when we're advising a business, you can map out perfectly the type of clients you've got, how they should buy a particular offering and at what price. But we've then got to explain that to the client or to the external party. And we often face with objections or why is it that much, or someone can do it cheaper. What do you think are the top tips here for kind of making sure we're approaching and being confident and able to substantiate the prices we're charging when it's competitive and we've got to really leverage on the value proposition and all the other aspects? What's your thoughts on that, Nigel?
I'm going to pick up one thing you said straight away there, which is be confident in your product.
Yeah.
If you know your product and it's creating value for the client, and that's the next place I was going to go, understand the client, the value you are creating for them, and whether it is, be honest with yourself about whether it is more or less. You can't justify the difference to yourself. You're unlikely to be able to justify it to the client, who will have somebody giving a counter argument sat on their right shoulder, no doubt. So I do think it comes from being confident in the product and value that, I think you said it earlier, Stephen, the value that you're creating in any particular space. I mean, we're talking a lot of B2B here in terms of, it feels like, in terms of like, or at least longer term contract relationships. It's slightly different to some of the product stuff, which we can touch on in a second. But I do think understanding the value is the starting point for being confident.
Stephen, I know you've run a pricing team in a reasonable size service industry. So what's your kind of top tips for getting the offering at the right price over the line and dealing with some of those objections you might get?
Well, I think having a number of testimonials, case studies to be able to fall back on, and to be able to demonstrate that value that you've delivered, that service offering, I think that's really important. And also, I touched on it earlier. There's many levers that you can pull, and quite often, if you're selling a bit of technology into that, which provides information, then you can spread the cost of your offering across a number of things, and that also becomes quite sticky, which helps you coming in for renewal, makes you more integrated into the client. And I suppose just understanding their problems. I mean, I touched on it before, but if they have a specific problem that they're trying to solve, and you try and align your pricing so that if they win, you win. I mean, one of our biggest clients back in the day had a huge portfolio that they wanted to reduce. They didn't really understand where they were spending money. So we incorporated a sort of savings glide path where we slowly provided more and more information as the data grew through us providing more of a service. And then we aligned our fee so that if we reduced their overall spend in that space by the KPIs that they had targeted, let's just call it 5%, then there was a kicker over and above that, which meant that, we were getting more if they were, so that, they're all aligned. And that's a very sophisticated client. But I think just listen to the client, try and have that conversation, and try and get away from just literally being driven to a specific number, which impacts the service that they might be wanting at the end of the day. So.
No, perfect. No, that's really, really good advice, Stephen. Thank you for that. Nigel, do you want to talk a bit about products, just to cover some pricing and some tips around product?
Yeah. So in terms of the last couple of organisations that I've dealt with, where I was dealing with product and innovative new products, I'll pick on a technology one, hardware one, from a year or so ago. It was interesting for pricing. The pricing was almost decided before I came in to help before they'd got any commercial help. The people who'd invented the product, and in fairness, they had created a new product with patents and all those sort of things, had decided the pricing with virtually no experience of the market that they were going into. Just a view of, I know the cost of production, which obviously you can work on the cost of production, but there was a core cost of production. And this is what I think it should sell for, and the margin I'm going to make, and therefore the discounts I can give to people selling this in my market. But they were heavily dependent for half the business on resellers and entrants into the B2C consumer market, with a complete lack of understanding of the other players in that sale process and the margins they would be expecting to take, the cost of actually taking a product to market. So just because they got a product, they were taking directly to market partly themselves. You can understand that model. You're selling therefore direct on, and they've got the pricing pretty close on that one, but they've not left themselves anything like enough space to attract the big retailers in to come and take the product and put it on the shelves, and understand the cost of marketing that product digitally as well, in terms of what was needed in there. So what I would say is make sure either you know your market that you're playing into, or you've got people, be it the sector that you're playing into, the product type you're playing into, or the geography you're playing into. Work with people who understand the market that you're taking your product and service into before you start deciding that's what my pricing is going to be. And remember, everyone will look at these things internationally as well. So what plays in one country is almost certainly going to play in the other as well. They ended up underpricing what I think was a good product, and it became a real problem to them in terms of getting people over the line, because new people over the line, because the commitments they'd already made. So make sure you understand where you're going and what the prices need to be. It was one case, in that case, of actually pushing it up a little bit before you get too out there with your price in front of people that shows or online or whatever it may be.
Cool. No, excellent. That's really, really helpful, Nigel. Thanks for sharing that. We're actually almost out of time for the slot we had for this, and I think there's lots here we could continue to talk about. Just thinking about the current challenges we've got at the moment and what businesses might be thinking. Just that we should end with top tips on pricing that could apply to any business. If a business owner or a management team was going to just spend a little bit of time looking at pricing strategy, Nigel, what would be your top tip?
Go back to where I started. Start with your existing clients and market, and make sure the pricing you've got is still creating value for them given their changed circumstances. The worst customers to lose, clients to lose, are the ones you've already got.
Yeah.
Because other people will be out hunting them. So make sure you keep what you've got to start with, then start looking out to what I need to be doing elsewhere. What value am I going to give them over the next 6 to 12 months?
Yeah. No, perfect. Thanks, Nigel. Stephen, top tips?
I suppose on the one hand, don't be afraid to have a conversation with someone if you feel like the pricing isn't where it needs to be. You'd be surprised if you go in there and you've got clear evidence and you're doing a good job, don't be afraid of having that conversation, particularly in this backdrop. And my second top tip would be if a target client or RFP, however you describe it, comes to your table and you haven't been part of that conversation before it arrives to you, then it's probably not really worth you actually participating in that process, because you weren't part of the creation of that. So you're probably being used as a sort of scapegoat to keep the price low as a benchmarking exercise, and only really go after those ones that you've been part of that conversation before it arrives, because those tend to be the clients that you actually want.
Yeah. No, great. Thank you, Stephen. That's really useful. And thanks, Nige. Really enjoyed the conversation as ever today. So thank you both, and look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like more information about the topics discussed in this podcast, then you can find us on our website at moveyourbusinessforward.com.